Welcome back to LOL. I am Craig Poster Jardula, your host, the captain, here with my co host, the professor himself, Jeremy Kuzmarov. You know, he's a professor at Tulsa Community College, but he also is an author of many books, including his new book, Warmonger, a story about the Clintons. It's a must read. Go grab it. Jeremy, professor, how are you doing today?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
Good, man. This seems a little staged, but we'll roll right through it. We're already kind of clicking on all cylinders over here. Listen, your new book, Warmonger, talks about the Clintons and the Democrats. It's kind of crazy nowadays because the Democrats, most of them in office, are warmongers, right? My libertarian friends used to tell me, Professor, that back in the days, they used to count on us lefties to push back against war. Now, us lefties, the ones who are true leftists, not the synthetic left that we always talk about here on LOL, which is where the left critiques itself and laughs out loud to keep from crying because there's a lot to cry about. But this, establishment left that keeps voting and is pro-war, including what we saw on the Ukrainian aid bill that happened on 420. Just take a look at this, Professor, and I want to get your immediate thoughts. They're waving Ukrainian flags on the floor of Congress over here. I mean, this is nuts. Check it out. You tell me, Professor, as you see these guys waving the flags, they're on the floor. Are they delusional, Professor?
I think so. We haven't seen this kind of fealty to a foreign nation in Congress, to my knowledge, at all. And I mean, they have this, worship of Ukraine, and I mean, look, they're completely, ignoring that. Look, Zelensky, the leader who they revere, has banned 12 political parties. He's carried out an assassination campaign extending into Russia. The former head of the Socialist Party in Ukrainian parliament was hunted down mafia style in Moscow. They have the Azov battalion. Their military is dominated by far right elements. They've committed massive human rights crimes for years in eastern Ukraine. They provoked a war against a more powerful neighbor they cannot win. It's one of the most corrupt governments in the world. So what does that tell you about these congressmen that are just worshiping it? I mean, it's like we live in the Twilight Zone.
Yeah. So even like groups like the World Socialist website, who I've had my beef with before, we've knocked heads on January 6th and other issues. I think that they're not willing to open up to the populist right. But hey, man, they can make some points. And I'm really glad you see in this last article, they wrote progressives with the quotes, right? Because they've stolen the name progressive. Some people consider Nancy Pelosi a progressive. And Democratic Socialists of America members vote to fund the imperialist war against China and Russia. And I think that's kind of great too, as well, because even though we disagree on a lot of things, there are things we can agree on and say, hey, despite our differences, this is not good over here. What the heck, Professor, are these progressives, right? And Democrats or leftists, what are they doing in Congress?
Well, I think in a way, the squad, it's a kind of rebranding effort by the Democratic Party to make themselves look like they're hip and more diverse and to attract younger, supporters of the party. But really, they're kind of wolves in sheep's clothing. I mean, their company, men and women, really, they serve the agenda of the Democratic Party, which receives funding from Wall Street, which owns the major defense contractor that profit massively off of war. So they present this kind of progressive veneer, but yet at the end of the day, they're just supporting Democratic Party policies and supporting the warfare state. And they might oppose certain intervention, like some of them are speaking out against the atrocities in Gaza, but they've been silent about the atrocities in Ukraine, and they're willing to hand over billions of dollars for that, to the neglect of their own constituents who, some of these representatives come from districts where their people are suffering. They're working class people who are being hard hit in this economy, and they need support from the federal government. They need federal funding for education and healthcare. But when they're signing away bills for $95 billion, there's no money for that and for their
Yeah.
constituents.
It's kind of crazy because I always ask the question, are they useful idiots or bought off propagandists? And that's something I was wondering what you would think there. From the information you just gave us, I would say bought off propagandists, right? But I mean, they look for the useful idiots. I kind of repeat this rhetoric from the squad, and they're liberals, mostly women of color. So they play into the culture war issues, and they hit up all those issues that really kind of yank on a lot of Americans' emotions, a lot of young people's emotions. But not one voted against the Ukraine aid package or the war in NATO, right? It's just crazy. AOC, and we have a little quick clip over here. Check out this clip of AOC talking and praising, and this is supposed to be a progressive. This is supposed to be a democratic socialist of America. Listen to this.
That the core and the key that we have here is in support geopolitically instability, is in supporting Ukraine in this moment. Having U.S. military assistance and broader global assistance to Ukraine should be one of our top geopolitical priorities, because it is the key in defending democracy geopolitically, whether your interest is in China, whether the interest is in anywhere else there. All of the focus here is in Ukraine and in supporting and ensuring that Putin and an authoritarian regime in Russia does not prevail in changing the geopolitical order, rule of law, and functioning democracy worldwide. And frankly, I think it's important from my vantage point on the second point is that anything that impedes the swiftness and the urgency of our ability to get that support to Ukraine is overall contributing to the volatility of our situation. Would you
All right, that's
say
good.
that that's a
So,
fair
I mean,
assessment?
here we are. Once again, she's using all the talking points, right? All the talking points, Professor, about, Putin's a thug. He's authoritarian. I was wondering, do you think she had a flag when they voted for this on the floor? And why do you think overall she is voting for this aid package to Ukraine?
Well, I mean, I heard nothing about her about no consciousness about the American real geopolitical agenda of the United States to isolate and weaken Russia, to dominate the entire Eurasian region, to pry Ukraine away from the Russian orbit, to use Ukraine as a kind of lever to weaken Russia. I mean, that's the reality. And she's oblivious to that. I mean, she's a smart lady. She could read into these. There are a lot of articles and books out there that would elucidate that for her. But I think she's a professional politician who made it. Had a very lucrative and successful career, aligning herself with the and working for the Democratic Party and its goals. So she's not going to go there. And I mean, it is kind of embarrassing that more people are not calling her out. That this is somebody's claims to be a socialist, and yet she supports an extreme right-wing government that murders socialists like Ilya Kiva, with the head of the parliament in Ukraine, a socialist, the head of the Socialist Party, and he was murdered mafia style. Any socialist should be in solidarity with him and his family, and outraged at this criminal government that would do that. And they banned the Socialist Party, Zelensky.
Yeah.
So how could a socialist support a guy who bans the Socialist Party and hunts them down, and pretend this is a great beacon of democracy? It's George Orwell.
Yeah. I mean, well, we saw some of them, right? So the squad members voting against, the aid package to Gaza, right? To Israel. To help them continue with their genocide and their ethnic cleansing. It's a sad thing. But none of them, like we repeated, voted for the, to push back against this Ukraine aid package. Why do you think there's such a difference between the two, where the squad and people like Cori Bush, who, if we can just pull up really quickly, her speech, right? That she wrote. And she wrote, "Throughout my tenure in Congress, I have championed human rights, democracy, and self-determination while opposing endless war. I oppose today's effort to send billions of dollars more in military funding to Israeli forces, which a majority of the public opposes, to enable genocide and famine, gut humanitarian assistance by continuing to ban funding to the UNRWA, jeopardize the chances of securing and lasting ceasefire and deepening the burgeoning threat of regional war. I refuse to be the party of ongoing genocide that Netanyahu and his far-right government and the United States are inflicting on the Palestinian people. Similarly, I refuse to allow the Ukrainian people to suffer at the hands of the murderous Putin regime. That's where the bells should be going off, where it just turns completely. St. Louis overwhelmingly stands with Ukraine. Really? Do you think they were waving Ukrainian flags when this vote was passed? And I voted to support the Ukrainian people in their struggle against Russia's illegal invasion. Why does the squad and people like AOC and Cory Bush, in particularly, have a hard time differentiating the two wars, what's going on? I mean, 14,000, Professor, 14,000 civilians were killed in the Donbass. We see all these protests from all these college students when it comes to the Gaza situation for the Palestinians, right? We don't see that for the people of the Donbass. Why can't they make the distinguish between the two and see that there really is no difference? It's just U.S. empire. Go ahead, Professor.
That's a great question. And there may be a variety of reasons. One, I think the media coverage has been so slanted on Russia that it impacts the entire population. And it has been targeted toward a liberal audience, very Russophobic, demonization of Russia and Putin. And, there was no reporting at all of those victims, whereas we have seen reporting on the victims of Gaza. I mean, and this is a kind of a break from the past where the media was entirely pro-Israel, but now they are reporting on some of the carnage. So I think it's that, and it may also be the identity politic. The left is so taken in identity politics that they kind of skew it that only the Black Lives Matter, which is, I think, a good slogan, but it's almost like only Black Lives Matter. When you have whites being killed with weapons from your government, they don't care. And that's one reason a lot of Republicans or independents find these people hypocritical, because they take that identity politics too far. I mean, all lives have to matter, but they have no regard, only if it's a black or colored life. So I think it's just taking.
So that's crazy. See, I think what you just said there, a lot of people are afraid to say out loud, right? The fact that they don't care about Ukraine and Russia because it's a lot of white people getting slaughtered. You know what I'm saying? And sometimes they just, they're silent on that and they look at the atrocities. I mean, I think that there is something damaging when you only look at issues from a race-based, kind of position or mindset. That's something you pointed out. I'll say it again. And you wrote about this, okay? Because they all voted against the TikTok ban. They had to, because their constituents and their people, their voters are young. So they couldn't vote to ban TikTok, even though it's going to go through and whatnot. So they had to go vote against that. But TikTok has done two things. It has shown what is happening in Gaza. And that's why the Israeli lobby has come in and said, get rid of TikTok, because we're getting butchered on that. You can see these same videos on the internet if you look through them of what's happening in Ukraine, in Russia. In fact, you wrote an article, I believe, in Covert magazine, right, about the children in Donetsk who were killed by U.S. supplied shells manufactured by the BAE systems, right? Eva Bartlett reported in Covert magazine about Ukraine's use of anti-personnel mines in Donetsk, a major human rights crime. I mean, this seems like selective caring of sorts. Why can't people see that not only there's atrocities that are taking place in Gaza, but they're also, and they've been taking place inside Russia, Ukraine, and it give you a different mindset, about what's going on. It's just they get to kind of stamp this, and they do this with the movies too, Professor, right? I always talk about how I'll never forgive Sylvester Stallone for making me root for the Mujahideen in Rambo 3, and also the Russian he fought in Rocky 4. They kind of program you to be anti-Russia, but it is racism, is it not?
I believe so. I believe Russophobia is a form of racism. This hatred of Russians, this stereotype. I mean, you couldn't get away in a lot of Hollywood films or the media. Present these stereotypes of the Russian leaders. That if they did that, an African or African American leader, everybody would be up in arms, rightfully, that this was a racist depiction. And I think that helps explain your question, that Russia has been so thoroughly demonized. And there's such ingrained Russophobia, which is a form of racism, that people are even happy when Russians are being killed. and they don't care at all. And I mean, I care about everybody. I'm horrified by, my heart goes out to the victim in Gaza, as well as these people of Eastern Ukraine. And I'm horrified that my government is supplying those weapons and is complicit in war crime in both places. And these, progressives should do the same if they're really progressive and care about human rights. And they should call out the U.S. empire, as you point out. These are imperialistic policies designed to advance U.S. empire, to advance U.S. corporate interests, whether in Israel, whether in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And those are the forces that left-wing movements should be fighting against.
Yeah. So AOC and Cori Bush, right? They talk about the whole Gaza situation. So does everybody, all the squad members. We understand some of the funding where it comes from. You pointed it out. We understand also too the culture war issue, right? The racial issue aspect of it. We just talked about that. That could be another possibility. Those are two reasons. Is there another sinister, deeper reason why you think AOC and Cori Bush don't talk about the Russian-Ukrainian slaughter of civilians? Other than those other two reasons, maybe? Is there something like from a mental programming narrative management position that you can think of, Professor?
I mean, I'm not sure. You'd have to analyze them psychologically. You'd also look at their funding. I mean, they may receive funding from military industries or, Wall Street. As much of their rhetoric may, be populist or against the entrenched economic powers. When you start to look at funding, you find that almost every politician receives some funding. So they might criticize one military intervention somewhere that looks really bad and that makes them look good to oppose, but they're not going to oppose the U.S. empire, and they're not going to oppose other major military interventions or major cuts in the military budget.
Yeah. I think there's something to it, though, Professor, too, as well. And I was just trying to make a point to see where your head was at, that there's always something. We talked about how most Democratic Party members don't like Russia, right? So they keep they keep repeating the lie over and over again and it does stick. We kind of analyzed that before, right?
Yeah.
I just was wondering if you thought there was maybe something to it to never talk about something, you know what I'm saying, that it will never really come to fruition. If you keep people concentrated on culture war issues, which are mostly divisive within the neighbors, and not talk about some of these issues that's going on with NATO and Russia, to where they won't be talking about that or bringing it up, that is the voters. I mean, in Colombia, Professor, they have all these protests going on right now for standing up for the people in Gaza, but never the protests going on for the people in Russia.
Yeah, and hundreds of thousands of working people have been killed on both sides of the conflict that was easily avoidable, and that the evidence indicate that the United States and European countries deliberately provoked and have prolonged, including through these aid packages, are giving Ukraine the confidence to continue when really it's a doomed cause, and they should be negotiating an end to the conflict and salvaging some of their territory, because inevitably Russia is going to take over more territory. So these aid packages are costing tens of thousands of lives, and again, it's U.S. weapons, being used to slaughter innocents. But these protesters, yeah, I mean, I think they lack political consciousness, and they lack understanding the bigger picture, and they should be, developing an anti-imperialist movement among young people who want to restore, Republican ideals to the country, and for the government to invest in in education and healthcare, and not permanent war. It's not just Israel, Gaza. I mean, that is one dangerous hot point, but there's the escalation in China, and there's a situation in Ukraine, and you've got to put everything together and oppose the machine.
Yeah. So you also pointed to this. There's this article out in the New York Times says the Ukraine war helped push world military spending to a 35-year high, study says. As a professor, if you're ever talking about this, do you have a different approach right now, being that it seems like we're so not only just addicted to war, but numb to what's going on outside of our own borders? I mean, this really is a quagmire when you think about it. I mean, Ukraine war, right? Help push the world military spending to a 35-year high. I get it that there's more advanced weapons, more expensive weapons, but it seems like the empire is just going around causing death and destruction everywhere. And our children, aside from this latest, Gaza situation, they really don't know a lot about it, or they really don't say a lot about it because I think they feel maybe helpless or hopeless that they can't do anything, Professor?
Well, yeah, and firstly, this article underscored the hideousness of this recent Ukraine bill and the hypocrisy of these progressives who purport to stand for social justice and human rights, and yet they're signing off on these bills and this aid that is pushing military spending to record levels and is causing such huge destruction. And as Dwight Eisenhower was said, every money spent on a missile or weapon is a money taken away from a hungry child, from a kid who needs a good education, from a family that needs proper health care. So they seem oblivious to that, and they're deluded about Ukraine and the character of its government. And yeah, I think a lot of the public is just not oblivious. They've been ingrained with this Russophobia, and so they think Russia are the bad guys and we're the good guys, and they don't have a real understanding of what's going on. The schools have failed them. I mean, you're not going to get those students at Columbia are not going to get knowledge from their professor. Most of the professors are extremely Russophobic and pro-Ukraine. It's Rab in the academy. If they're taking courses on Cold War history, Russia is often depicted as the bad guy. So they're not learning about this in school. They're not reading books much anymore. So they don't really have a good understanding of world affairs. And then the government, has distanced the public. They've made a way to fight wars by proxy. They're not going to reinstitute the draft. That would cause real riots and
Yeah,
massive
no doubt.
upheaval. So, these young people don't have to fight. I mean, if their ass was on the line, then they might, start to question it. But these wars are very distant. So.
Yeah. We're behind the gun, Professor, and it's safest behind the gun. That's why a lot of people come here, because they want to be behind the gun. Representative Jamal Bauman, one of my favorites, wrote on Saturday, "Our government has a moral obligation to protect peace, dignity, and shared humanity in everything we do." I right off the bat, the first line, we have an obligation to protect peace by funding war. I mean, this guy's a clown. He's even said, "Oh, before, when somebody was following him, hey, why are you funding this war here? Hey, I'm a pro-peace candidate, but Putin." It's like they can just say that stuff so naive and get away with it. "I was proud to vote in support of Ukraine and Taiwan's effort to uphold democracy." They say it's about upholding democracy, Professor. Bauman also added that we were able to register our unwavering support for Ukraine and Taiwan with separate bills. The nearly $70 billion in assistance to these nations is a critical step towards preserving democracy at home and abroad. It's like they got to still say that stuff all the time. It's about the protecting democracy. Professor, as we're closing out, what do we need to do to hold these squad members in particular on the left accountable?
Well, I think, we need a broader program of education, of political organizing around these issues we're discussing. And we need grassroots candidates to emerge that will challenge them in debates and challenge them at the polls.
Yeah, I think it's important too, as well, even though the system might not be the best and you really don't have a shot to really maybe beat that congressperson because of the election system. Who knows? Whatever you may think. If you can get out there and you can make a point and you can debate back, push back against what's going on, maybe catch a little fire on social media. I mean, there's a chance at least your message gets out there. Sometimes, Professor, when you win, you actually lose because you might have to, step back, not stand behind your beliefs. But sometimes if you lose because you're standing behind your beliefs, you might actually win because you might win in the court of public opinion. So your final thoughts on what's going on with these squad members in the left and the whole situation when it comes to the Ukraine funding?
Well, I would underscore the point that I think it's more for public relation, that the squad are just professional politicians who are playing a certain role, that they're made to look, bring diversity to the party, bring a kind of hip feel, attract young people. But these are really professional politicians whose loyalty is with the Democratic Party, and they're not willing to challenge really the U.S. warfare state or American empire at their actions show.
Yeah. Well, that's it for the show here, ladies and gentlemen. And this was LOL. That was the Professor, Jeremy Kuzmarov. I am your captain, Craig Pasta Jardula. Oh, the timer is up. We are done for now. We'll see you on the flip side. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, go to Pasta to Go on YouTube, Rumble, and Twitter.